Oh, this wooden toy set is really, really fun.
It is.
We could pretend it's like real life.
Kids love to play, and play that points to Jesus is a big part of a child's faith journey. Wooden toys from Wicking Vicar do just that, growing the faith through play. Wicking Vicar's Children's Church play set lets little ones delve into the divine service, and the Children's Advent Wreath is a safe way for kids to make the Advent tradition their own. Solid wood and heirloom quality for children ages 3 and up. Order yours today at wickingvicar.com and click on Wooden Toys in the menu bar. This Christmas, gift the children in your life faith-building wooden toys from Wicking Vicar.
Philip ran to the Ethiopian and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And he said, "How can I, unless someone guides me?" Like the Ethiopian eunuch, there are millions of people around the world who want to understand what the Bible says, but they need someone to guide them. The Lutheran Heritage Foundation translates books like Luther's Small Catechism, which opens Scripture's meaning. To learn how you can help introduce people to the Savior, visit lhfmissions.org.
You're listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah. And I'm flying solo today. This is a bit of a twist in the podcast, and there's a reason for that. This is a special edition of the podcast because I am in Essential Communication Strategy class doing my master's degree. If you've been listening to the Sarah Goes to School episodes on the podcast, you'll know I'm doing that master's program with Concordia University Irvine, and you've gleaned some knowledge from my study notes along the way. And in this communications class that I'm currently in, our final project is to do a podcast. And I thought, what better way to do a podcast than to have a special edition of the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast, because our assignment is to interview a leader on a leadership topic. And we have our Leading Ladies series, and I thought this was a perfect opportunity to invite one of the leading ladies that I have been actually dying to have on the podcast anyway. This was a great excuse to invite one of my friends, and we just get to have a one-on-one conversation about a leadership topic today, and y'all get to benefit from this knowledge today. It's going to be super duper fun. I am so excited to have Deaconess Dr. Kim Schave on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kim.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Sarah.
So just to throw your title out there, Deaconess Dr. Kim Schave is director of the MBA and MSBA programs and assistant professor of accounting at Concordia University, Wisconsin, and Ann Arbor Schools of Business, which is a super long title. But I knew you back when we were colleagues, down the hall from each other, when you were the, director of project and policy administration here at the LCMS International Center. And my favorite memory was when Ohio State and University of Michigan would play each other in football, because I am a Michigan fan and you are an Ohio State fan, and we would have these meme wars on our cubicle walls. And it was the best thing ever. They're actually still hanging in my cubicle.
I might have to resurrect this year with a coworker who's in a course that I'm teaching. So don't be surprised if something appears on your door.
That would be amazing. Those were such fun times. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. I get to learn from your feet today, which is very exciting for me. You have a lot of extensive experience in business, in leadership. You have your PhDs in leadership, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm excited to learn from you today. So first, tell me about your journey to where you are today. You're a professor of business at our Concordia universities. How did you end up where you are today?
Oh, that's a long story. And it's so funny to hear you speak like that. I think the more we further our education, and you're probably finding this in your master's studies, the more you realize you don't know.
Yes.
When you talk about subject matter experts, I'm just Kim. I'm a wife, I'm a mom. I don't think about the titles are great. Yes, I've earned these things. I've worked hard, but I'm just Kim, and if there's something that I've learned along the way that I can help by sharing with others, they might learn from it. Great. But I feel that why I teach is I'm a lifelong learner. So I love to continue to learn and learn from others. So again, teaching gives me that outlet. Oh boy, I have a long story. I originally, like in high school, was in a cooperative education course where I was learning to type, dictate, take shorthand, like literally back in the late 80s, we were still taking shorthand. Like the first Apple computers were coming out and we were using those. So I was training to be a secretary. And that's where I thought I'd land in a career. Never had any, thoughts about going to college. And then all of a sudden, I just got this inkling one day to investigate the National Guard. And I knew that there were tuition benefits available. And I decided I had to go to that one amazing school in the great state of Ohio that you know and you love, that has been very difficult for me. As like I'm living in Ann Arbor right now. I'm based on the Ann Arbor campus at this point. It's been hard to live here, but I'll tell you, I'll be really honest with you, Sarah. I think us Buckeye fans are much more difficult to get along with in Ohio than how Ann Arbor fans treat Ohio State fans. So my coworkers give me a hard time. But anyway, so I decided I really wanted to go to this school. I, maybe not chose to go there because I wanted to go to the football games. We'll just leave that up in the air at this point. And then I was able to join the National Guard and get tuition benefits to be able to afford that. I'm a first generation college student. So that was definitely a benefit for me to be able to afford school. Ended up being activated for Desert Storm. My unit was serving in Frankfurt, Germany, managing the terrorist threat. I was a military police officer. Right before being deployed, I had met my husband, who's an LCMS pastor, and we were planning our wedding. I got sent overseas, and I was planning my wedding from overseas at the time. Made it home just in time for my wedding, and ended up finishing my degree in a different school because I moved with him. He graduated before I did. And then, kind of interesting, I was in the for-profit realm. I worked with a public accounting firm. Accounting was my background. Just didn't like it. It was all about the bottom line, the money, and it just didn't sit well. And I didn't come to faith in the traditional way. At that point in my life, I had been baptized and confirmed in what had been an ALC church as an adult. I was a senior in high school, and it just wasn't sitting well. I won't say I was like a really strong Christian. I went to church, and I felt like I was kind of lukewarm. And then my husband and I, a few years later, ended up losing twins in our first pregnancy. And that really helped me on my faith journey to understand what was important. Family was important. That whole profit motive was just thrown out the window. So I was very blessed to be able to find an opportunity to shift to the nonprofit realm, work part-time or even work from home when I had young children at home and was able to manage the house and the duties of wife and mother in part-time while, they were napping, be able to do some work to keep my skills current. And then, unfortunately, 9/11 occurred, and that loss of life, that just tremendous, just the weight that was on all of us, just seeing that shameful loss of life, just really had inspired my husband to consider the ministry. Now, God had been working on it for a little while, and that event in itself really culminated in him choosing to go to seminary. I went willingly along. I wasn't real well-versed in Lutheran theology. I went to a couple Semmelweis classes and I was hooked. There was a new deaconess program starting there at the same time. Lo and behold, I ended up enrolling in that and became a deaconess at that point. So I've always loved, and I've worked as a deaconess as well, but more like entrepreneurial social ministries, a soup kitchen, a food pantry I volunteer at now. So kind of where like faith and commerce come together because of my business background is really where I feel the most comfortable, which is what led me to ending ultimately here at Concordia, landing here to teach business courses, specifically accounting, but I get to teach some more general leadership management courses as well, which I loved. So I learned needing to have a little bit of income while my husband was at the seminary. I was blessed to have a supervisor take a chance on me, hire me to teach at a small business school across the street from the seminary. And I just found this love of teaching and doing that, really helped me to understand that I love to learn. And as a lifelong learner, teaching really fills that need. So that's where I'm at right now. And that's how I try to blend my business background and my deaconess or theological background together to the best of my ability as God would see fit.
Yeah, and it's very inspiring for me. Some of our listeners may remember that I am also planning on doing deaconess studies at some point in the process of applying for that. So like your path and your background in blending things that may not seem like they go together, like business and theology, like how does that work? That's been inspiring for me personally as I've kind of been figuring out my own path through wherever God's calling me, as I'm sure you understand. And so why I wanted to talk to you is that you have this background in business, but you also have theological training, and blending those, I think, is such an interesting space to be in. And so specifically, I want to hone in on psychological safety, which is this businessy, ethereal term. So let's define what this means first. So people who are like, what does that even mean, Sarah? What is psychological safety? What does it mean?
Yeah, I think I just want to clarify context. When you think about, some people might hear that and think, oh, that sounds so woke, our snowflakes have to go to their safe space. That is not at all. In terms of the context of organizational behavior, that is not what that is. Psychological safety, I'll read one definition as one author put it: a shared belief that it's okay to take risks, to express ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes. That's the biggest piece there, that you have to be open to admitting your mistakes, and you have to have leadership that's understanding that mistakes are going to happen, that failure is going to happen. And you don't have to have any kind of fear of any negative consequences or retribution. It's a comfortable area where people trust each other. You're building that trust. You're building that organizational safe space, if you want to call it. But it's really just teamwork. I mean, it's really about working together collaboratively, trusting each other, not being afraid, having that fear factor in place so that you can take risks, you can take some chances, and that ultimately leads to success. You're going to have failures along the way. We all know that. We've experienced that in our personal lives. We'll experience that in our professional lives. But you have to take those risks and experience those failures to learn and grow from them. And that's really that space, again, in the context of organizational behavior, which psychological safety means. And in the for-profit world, that is extremely helpful for a business's bottom line, but it's also helpful to build a strong organizational culture that's well-functioning and then that is not toxic. In the nonprofit realm, you could say the same thing. It's enabling individuals in the ministry or other types of nonprofits to really be able to work comfortably with their colleagues in an environment where they're comfortable collaborating and understanding and forgiving of mistakes and personality differences and things like that. You can be yourself. And really research has shown that when you do have that psychological safety in place and it's strong and it's part of the culture, then the organization is going to perform much better.
Mm-hmm. So what does that look like then if an organization lacks psychological safety? How does that play out when an organization does not practice this ability to be yourself, to feel safe, to take risks? How can that harm an organization?
Well, speaking from experience in multiple organizations, especially in my military experience, it creates a horrible work environment. It's just, again, as I mentioned, the toxicity is there, highly dysfunctional. You're not organized. You're not working like a well-oiled machine like we like to see, especially in the for-profit business world. And again, the performance productivity is diminished greatly. The competition among team members can become unhealthy, even to the point of being unethical, where you might see some backstabbing and gossip and other things so people can get ahead. That's certainly not helpful. And then there's actually research that's shown that the negative impacts on not having a really strong psychological safety feature in place in your culture, it impacts employee well-being negatively. It's going to add stress, increases burnout, turnover, which means employees are leaving, and it's much more expensive to hire a new employee than to keep someone and try to make some changes internally to ensure that that team is working effectively. So turnover is not a good deal at all. And then just the overall performance of the organization is going to be diminished if you don't have that safe, comfortable working environment where people are free to just be themselves and learn and grow. There's another piece of that I learned about in my PhD studies too, where learning organizations is another kind of behavior term that you hear, a learning organization. It's where you're seeking to learn and to grow. You're open to new knowledge and new ways of doing things. Again, you're willing to take the risks and you're minimizing those risks to the extent possible, but you take those risks in order to work more effectively as a team to improve the organization overall. So those kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. So then on the flip side of that, what does it look like when an organization is practicing really good psychological safety? What are some of the characteristics of like the team dynamics and the relationships between a boss and their direct reports, or just between team members? What does that look like? If I walked into an organization and I was able to be like, yeah, these teams have psychological safety, what would some of those characteristics look like?
Yeah, there are several that I can quote from different articles in the literature. Clear communication is present, obviously, with your major communication is extremely important in any organization. And it's not just one way, it's got to be two way. You have to listen as much as you're going to speak or send out messages. Active listening, you want to be able to actively and empathically listen to those that are following you as a leader. You want to hear their concerns. You want to hear their input. We can accomplish so much more as a group than we can as an individual. So listening to other individuals' input, their ideas, their suggestions is really helpful, and that's going to help lead to success. You're going to see a resiliency in the people that are working on that team. They're used to having some mistakes made and failures, and they overcome them. They adapt, they overcome, they improve, they work more effectively together when they go through some of those challenges. So that's important. You're going to see collaboration. You're going to see involvement. Leading by example, your leaders are putting themselves out there as servant leaders. They're willing to serve the team or serve their staff members, as whatever you would like to call that particular group. And they're showing them how it should be done. They're leading the way. And that's not easy to do. It takes, I could get into a whole dialogue here on emotional intelligence and what's involved with that. And you're providing the resources and support that your team needs to be successful. And then lastly, recognize and celebrate any kind of progress or support. Pat each other on the back, throw a little party, have a lunch potluck, order a cake, have some kind of celebration when you do achieve those successful outcomes for projects, and just celebrate that because it means you're working well together.
Yeah. And I know in our KFUO team here, this is something, thankfully, that we've been building over the last few years in our team. Like we talk about having this culture of grace, which is, I think, a similar thing with psychological safety of like, if you make a mistake, it's okay to be like, hey, I messed this up. And we learn from that because like all of us make mistakes. We're cranking out so much stuff all the time with all of the content that we do. It's okay to acknowledge that something went wrong. And then we're like, okay, how do we, like, is this a breakdown in technology? Is this a breakdown in a system, in a process? How are we going to learn from it? So I love hearing you talk about these things and relating them to how our team works here and how we've built this idea of this culture of grace so that, our team can collaborate and we can have these ideas and move forward and be a healthy team. And I'm curious, how have you practiced psychological safety? How have you practiced that culture of grace, of allowing people to have that safety of taking risks? I'm really curious with your students as a professor. How do you?
I was going to say, whether you're in the secular realm or in the ministry, that culture, that attitude of forgiveness is so important. We know that as Christians. So even if you're out in the for-profit world and you're not working in an environment that's particularly Christian, but you can still, be an example to those that you work with by having that culture of forgiveness. Unfortunately, in the academia, it's a little bit different. I'm probably a little bit more nice than I could or should be as a professor because I'm teaching accounting to incoming freshmen for the most part. That's what I have been doing up until recently when I took on the director of our graduate program role. And they're in 2 forced accounting courses that they don't necessarily want to have to take, but they have to. So I have to understand these are people that are sitting there against their will, being held hostage in this boring accounting class, right? So what I try to do is just try to bring some humor into the classroom where I can. It is really incumbent upon us to integrate the faith and scripture in our courses. It's very difficult in accounting. I've managed to do it. Found lots of Bible verses that deal with, weights and measures, building the tower and all of that. But many of our students are not necessarily Christians, or they're maybe marginal, they're questioning, they're not really sure. So to be an example to, especially when students have real extreme circumstances, and some of them are just tearjerkers that you just can't believe. In this day and age, especially, like some of the things these students are dealing with that I would have never thought about having to deal with at their age, it's just sometimes seems insurmountable. Illness of parents or death of family members. So practicing grace, I think, is really important. Again, I use humor to let them know, like, I know this isn't the most exciting topic to learn about accounting, but here's how this is going to benefit you. You all want to make the big bucks, right? You want to be managers. You want to be leaders. You have to understand how to manage a budget. You have to understand at least how to read this to better yourself and improve yourself so that you can, ultimately achieve success in the, in the career that you choose to ultimately work in. Again, if you want to move ahead, move up the corporate ladder, so to speak, then you have to have these skills. Then when it comes time to late assignments and, well, I didn't quite do this right, I didn't understand it, I really do try to go out of my way to spend time either by Zoom or in person with office hours with students to help them at least grasp the content. It's going to help them down the line, even though they may not see it right now. So in a pure academic setting, again, it's a little bit hard. We have to assign grades. We have to make sure that we're enforcing due dates and deadlines and all of that. But at the same time, I also teach them if you want to be late, if something's not going well in your group assignment, you need to reach out to me. You need to email me. You need to speak to me just like you would your employer, your supervisor down the line, and get them in that mindset that this is how it's going to work. Not everything's going to go according to plan. You're not always going to finish a project on time. You're going to have things that get in the way and slow you down, but you have to know the importance of communication. Again, going back to what you're studying, that communication is key. So that's really between forgiveness, understanding, empathy, and then that as long as that communication is there, I find myself being able to much more practice that that forgiveness role than others that take advantage. And sometimes the law just has to be the law, and you have to put that hammer down.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And I think I've seen some of that just as you post stories on social media about, just stuff that happens in daily life as a professor, and understanding that like these kids are students and stuff happens, but being able to teach them through these moments of it's okay to like have a problem, but also this is how you deal with it as an adult. This is how you have conversations with people who you're responsible to, and to have those conversations. And that's so awesome to know that you're teaching these young people how to do that so that they can do that as adults when they get into the business world. So thinking as in our Lutheran lady realm, how can Lutheran ladies, regardless of what leadership role they're in, regardless of what team they're in, I mean, we're talking, like in a family unit this applies to, or if you're on the board of directors at church, or if you're on some other board of directors somewhere else, or you're in a nonprofit setting, regardless of the team, what are some ways that Lutheran ladies can practice these characteristics of psychological safety that you've been talking about to try to implement this a little bit more in our daily vocations?
Yeah, well, I think, everything that we've said previously is going to apply to whatever sphere that you're, discussing, whether it's civil or, whether it's in the family unit. I think authenticity is so important. You have to build trust. You have to know that you can trust one another, and forgiveness has to definitely be there. And again, the practice of exhibiting grace is definitely important. And just be there for others. Listen to them. Take time to actually listen. Some people are really good at speaking. Other people are really good at listening. And I think I found it to be very helpful. I'm more of an introvert, and I would much rather listen and learn. And my curiosity, I want to know about other people more so than me talking. I like to be off the radar and just kind of do my own thing in a corner. That's probably why I chose accounting. I like to sit in a little cubicle and crunch numbers. But the deaconess role has forced me to come out of that shell. But here's a quiz. Here's like some different things that you can look at too. You're practicing psychological safety if you can see these things. Hopefully this will help. If you make a mistake, no one holds it against you. If, let's see, you're able to bring up problems and tough issues and you're comfortable doing so, and you're not judged or, in any way insulted for doing so, then you know that you're in a psychologically safe environment. If you accept others for being a little bit different, and we're all different. And that's what, teamwork makes the dream work, right? We all have to be different. I am very different. And the courses that I teach, I'm very much quantitative, logical, due date driven, data driven, and I have no creative ability whatsoever unless it's in an Excel spreadsheet. But I understand the importance of people that have much more broader thinking and ideas and creative energy that can bring a project to fruition. I can execute if they bring the ideas. So it's important that we recognize that those differences are important, that it's safe to take a risk. So if you feel comfortable that you're able to take a risk, that you're in a psychologically safe environment. No one in that environment would deliberately act in a way that would undermine my efforts. That's another way you might know. And then that your unique skills and talents are valued and utilized, similar to what I was just saying, that we all are different, but we bring those differences, those different skills, those different thought processes together. And many good things can come from that versus an individual trying to work on their own or in an environment that's not psychologically safe, where you're not free to share these things and you just kind of clam up out of fear of retribution, which is not healthy at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of practicing the attributes and the kind of space that we want to have for ourselves, practicing that with other people as well. Like if I want someone to be able to forgive me if I come to them with a mistake, that's something that I also should be able to do for other people. And if I want other people to accept me in all the weird, crazy stuff that is in my personality, that goes both ways in this teamwork and being able to take that in a team environment. And I want to get to your deaconess training, the theological aspect of this as well, just because I know you spent some time like at Humanitri working in a very real deaconess role, working with people who are having just hard times in life. And how does theological training play a role in psychological safety, or just bringing theology and what we believe as Lutherans, treating people in a Christ-like manner? How does that theology side of this play into having psychological safety in teamwork?
Yeah, and for me personally, when I was in the deaconess program, the wonderful Dr. Just was the director of the program. He's also the expert on the book of Luke. So I took a class on Luke with him. And one of the Bible studies that I had written had to do with the great reversal about, the humble are the ones that will be exalted, and just that great reversal. It's wealth versus poverty. And I think because of my business background and then learning what deaconess ministry is and the mercy, human care aspects, it just really clicked for me in that class. And I think that's what's really led me. My heart and my passion is for working with the marginalized, helping them either individually, personally, one-on-one, or helping to connect resources for them to improve their lives. So I think for me, that was just instrumental and foundational for me reaching others to really be inspired by what I learned in my theological training, but especially that book of Luke, again, I think just resonated with me with my financial background, but all of it, just knowing when to apply law, when to know when to apply gospel. And we're not ever going to be experts in that. Dr. Luther was very clear on that. But when you're working in a ministry of mercy, or you're reaching out to those that are in need of specialized care, especially women, helping other women or children, you have to really know how you can best apply the gospel and share the love of Christ with them in a way that's going to resonate with them. Especially some people may be hostile. I've experienced that. And there are times myself in my own personal life I wasn't necessarily totally open to God's will. And I may have been angry about losses and other things that didn't go my way. And so trying to break through those barriers with people and kind of, get through their hardened heart to help them really truly understand how much God loves them and cares for them is really important. So the theology is so vital to everything that we do as a deaconess, but the practical side of that is so important too. The psychological safety, you have to create a space where people are comfortable talking to you so you can bring that theology that we've learned into that space and help them understand and really recognize God's love for them and be open to hearing about it and open to additional spiritual or pastoral care and coming to church.
Do you have any examples of what that looks like as a ministry worker, as somebody who's theologically trained? Do you have an example of what that kind of looks like, without breaking confidences, of course, of how that conversation can go when somebody needs to hear God's law and gospel and maybe isn't open to it? Like, how do you set that scene? How do you set that conversation so that someone may be more willing to hear what you have to say?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not easy, and you have to lead with prayer, definitely, and ask for God's guidance and words from Him. What I can think of in more general terms, disaster response was an area that I was very blessed to work in my early venture as a deaconess. And when you're kind of out there with first responders, what we have found, tornado and hurricane disaster response, there's what you see on TV are the buildings and the houses that are all well insured, they're destroyed, but they have insurance. But what you don't see are some of those poverty-stricken areas that are hit by these same disasters. You're not seeing them on the news. They don't necessarily have insurance. They don't have the resources to rebuild. So that tends to be, at least in my deaconess practice, where we would go first, where the news crews are going and, the other people aren't. And there are just some stories where people are just left with nothing, especially I can think of after a tornado response, a family was left with absolutely nothing. And they're angry, like, how could God let this happen? Their children, everybody survived, everything, their family survived. A neighbor, unfortunately, had passed away from that storm, but they had lost everything. They're really questioning, and they were practicing Catholics, as far as I understand it, what I recall. And it was really difficult, especially with the mom. Her sons had soccer tryouts that day. Nobody from the community was coming. They were from the wrong side of the track, so to speak, and nobody was really coming to help them. And we showed up. We had a comfort dog that the kids were able to, kind of love on, and it helped them open up a little bit about their traumatic experience as well. So it's not easy. It takes a lot of tools. It takes a lot of time, but that psychological safety comes into play here, where you have to just show that empathy, that care, that compassion that Christ first showed for us with those people, and listen to them, listen to their anger, let them vent if they're frustrated and angry with God. And then you try to take that and turn it around and help them see, look what He spared you from, look what He did give you. And we're here to help you. We're going to connect you with resources. This is God's work through us, the church, that's going to help you try to rebuild, and we'll connect you with the resources that you need. So that's an example that comes to mind for me anyway.
That's so great, of being able to bring the mercy of God to people in a way that makes it easier for them to hear, especially like after disaster. I'm glad you were able to do that. As we wrap up our time today, do you have any final words, any advice for Lutheran ladies who want to practice this culture of grace, the psychological safety, as they move forward in their vocations? Any final words?
I think authenticity is so important. Be yourself. Be who God created you to be. There's a time to speak, and there's certainly a time where we don't speak, but you have to be bold, I think, too. And you just have to build relationships with people where you're centered around trust and really just that confidence is there, more like you have confidence in your friends. You're not engaging in gossip and judgmental attitudes and things like that, but authenticity and forgiveness and grace is at the center of all this. Obviously, as Christians, we know that.
Absolutely. Kim, thank you so much for joining me today on this special edition Lutheran Ladies / Sarah Goes to School episode of the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. It's been so great to be able to talk to you and learn from your wisdom. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. I appreciate it.
And ladies, you can join us in our Facebook group and we can have more conversations about what this means in our Facebook group and also on our Instagram page at Lutheran Ladies Lounge. Join us in both of those places. You can also find all of our podcasts at kfuo.org/Lutheran Ladies Lounge or on your favorite podcasting app or on the KFUO radio app. You're listening to this special edition of the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah. Views and opinions expressed on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast may not represent the official position of the management or ownership of KFUO Radio, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge is produced by KFUO Radio and available at kfuo.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a review for us too. If you love the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast, consider financially supporting our producer, KFUO Radio, so we can keep doing what we do. Find out how at kfuo.org/give. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast is underwritten in part by Lutheran Heritage Foundation. LHF translates, publishes, distributes, and introduces books that are Bible-based, Christ-centered, and Reformation-driven. Learn more about their global ministry and how to support their projects at lhfmissions.org. Oh man, I forgot what I was saying. Edit!